listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Big tech is once again under fire with another report finding some of our biggest platforms are still choosing to not implement the tools that could save kids from sexual abuse.
We often think, it's just the dark web. So, well, no, actually, that entire onboarding, that early sort of exposure and getting into this sort of content is occurring on mainstream open web platforms.
That two-part deep dive, one with an expert and another with a dad whose son almost became a victim of sextortion, is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Sacha Barbour Gatt. It's Tuesday, the 10th of Feb.
Hey Chris, we're starting today in Sydney where protesters and police have clashed at a rally against the Israeli president's visit to Australia. 27 people were arrested as officers moved in to disperse the thousands of people intending to march through the CBD to state parliament. Their planned route went against a law which bans marches in designated areas, something the Palestine Action Group had failed to overturn in court earlier that day.
Footage from last night shows violent clashes between police and protesters, with people seen being pepper sprayed, punched and shoved as officers moved in to break up the protest. New South Wales Police has defended the actions of officers, with Assistant Commissioner Peter McKenna asked to respond directly to video appearing to show cops beating a man who had his hands up.
Out of context, I can understand why people looking at them might be quite concerned. I can understand why one video in particular, it might even be offensive to people. But I will say this, please understand they are small videos being put up, and I would say out of context of what was a rolling melee of violence and un-Australian and inappropriate behaviour tonight.
The rally's organisers have put out a statement condemning the response by police, labelling it sickening police brutality and calling for an independent investigation. Despite the outrage, McKenna has repeatedly praised the response.
I'm very proud of the police officers and the job they did tonight. I'm very proud of those officers who came to work not to be put in this position, but to keep the community safe, because that's what it was all about.
Earlier in the day, after landing in Sydney, Israel's President Isaac Herzog held a tightly controlled media conference during which he was only asked 2 questions by journalists, including one about the planned protests.
These demonstrations, in most cases, what you hear and see comes to undermine and delegitimize our right, my nation's right, the nation which I am the head of state of its mere existence, and is contradictory to whatever ever was said and done by Australia.
As the protests were unfolding in Town Hall about a K down the road, the Israeli president was attending an event hosted by the Zionist Federation of Australia at the ICC. Bondi victims, Jewish community leaders, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns and Herzog were among those who led tributes and spoke at an evening of light and solidarity.
We will never forget the people we lost, the wounds that were suffered, the families that grieve. And we will never forget the extraordinary, ordinary people who demonstrated courage and humanity by running towards the fire to rescue strangers. Absolutely.
Olympia Nova Peris, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton and Josh Frydenberg were also among the other high-profile attendees. When the event had wrapped, those in attendance were asked by police to stay put while they enacted an exit plan given what was unfolding like I mentioned, a K down the road at Town Hall. Yeah,
the footage is pretty intense to watch. We've heard from New South Wales Police there. They're standing by the actions of officers. It'll be interesting to see if anything moves on that today, given how there's been quite a reaction from not only the Palestine Action Group, but a number of MPs have spoken out already about what was witnessed at Town Hall and how protesters were moved along. There were also protests in other cities across Australia. There was one in Melbourne at Flinders Street Station. We also saw pepper spray used there. Canberra, around 500 people turned out with Senator Fatima Payman and Greens leader Larissa Waters also there. Brisbane and Hobart too saw protests turn out. Now, in terms of Herzog's visit, he's here for 4 days all up. We don't have his itinerary. This is an extremely tightly controlled visit. If you live in Sydney, if you've been in the CBD, you would have heard choppers all day yesterday, road closures, bollards being put up. Everything's being really closely monitored because of how contentious this is. It's just, it's pretty intense. But we do know he will visit Canberra at some point to meet the PM and the Governor-General, and he'll also go to Melbourne for more community events and meetings. Whether he'll be met with further protests, we'll have to wait and see.
Overseas now into the UK, where King Charles says he's ready to support any police investigation into his brother Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. In a statement released as we record this episode, Buckingham Palace says the King has made clear his, quote, profound concern at allegations which continue to come to light about Andrew's conduct, and while specific claims are Andrew's to address, Charles stands ready to help authorities.
It comes after police confirmed they were investigating fresh claims the former prince leaked confidential information to Jeffrey Epstein. The disgraced royal reportedly forwarded official reports about overseas trips he was taking as a government trade envoy in 2010 and 2011 to the child sex offender and financier. Police are also continuing to dig into allegations revealed in the Epstein files that Andrew received a trafficked woman from Epstein at his royal residence also in 2010, Chris.
Charles's statement comes amid mounting pressure on the royals in England as claims about the former prince continue to come out of the files. And interestingly, Sash, the King was also heckled for a second time in a week over it while meeting members of the public.
Charles, how long have you known about Andrew and Andrew?
Meantime, Prince William and Princess Catherine have made their first public statement on Andrew through a spokesperson for Kensington Palace. They didn't say much, though. It read, quote, I can confirm the Prince and Princess have been deeply concerned by the continuing revelations. Their thoughts remain focused on the victim. So very similar language there that we also heard last week from Prince Edward.
It's interesting to see the royals finally kind of speaking about this, and whether the fact that police are investigating this particular leak from the Epstein files, they're only investigating because it affects UK laws. You're not allowed to leak documents from highly classified, he was a trade envoy, right? So that's very secret, very confidential. You can't be sending that off to some financier in the US. It's clear that there's this desire for something to happen with Andrew. We saw that King Charles stripped his brother of his royal titles and honours late last year, and that was after Virginia Giuffre's memoir was published following her death by suicide. And she says she was trafficked to Andrew 3 times, including twice when she was 17. Of course, Andrew has always denied Giuffre's claims and other claims that have been coming out, not just in the Epstein files, but prior to that as well. Interestingly, Keir Starmer, the PM, is also facing pressure at the moment to resign, and that's over the uproar at the choice of a man called Peter Mandelson, who we've spoken about in the headlines before. He was chosen to be the nation's ambassador to the US, despite the former minister's known friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So lots to still come out of these files, and the response we're seeing is it's growing louder.
Back home, and the Communications Minister is seeking an urgent meeting with the popular gaming platform Roblox after fresh reports children are being exposed to sexually explicit and suicide-related material on it. Annika Wells says she's written to the video game giant after revelations last week a 27-year-old Queensland man had been charged with nearly 600 child abuse-related offences.
Police allege he groomed and coerced hundreds of kids in Australia and overseas through social media and gaming platforms. While authorities are yet to name the sites allegedly used by Ethan Burns-Dodera, Wells says Roblox can and must do more to protect kids, and that she'll be using the meeting to find out what steps they are taking to make the platform safe for younger users. Those steps are something we also look into in today's Deep Dive, which is a 2-parter.
And continuing to act like his stint as Donald Trump's head of government efficiency never happened, Elon Musk has announced SpaceX is shifting its focus from Mars to the moon, with plans to build a self-growing city there within the next 10 years. In a post to X, he says it'll be much easier to achieve this feat on the lunar surface because they can launch rockets to the moon much more often than they can to Mars.
Yeah, so according to Musk, you can only get to Mars when the planets align every 26 months, so just over 2 years. But building a city there is still a priority, he said, just not as urgent as doing it on the moon. Right now, SpaceX is planning to have an uncrewed landing on the moon in March next year, so stand by for that. Something I learned this morning, Chris, when I was digging into this is the why, why the focus. Why? Yeah, I was always like, why do rich people want to go to space, go like colonize space so bad. Sure, going to space, whatever, fun. Nice view.
Katy Perry loved it as well.
Oh, yeah. She was really in touch with love after that. But they want to build data centers up there to power AI. Wild, because they reckon the solar power, because it's uninterrupted sunlight on Mars and the moon, apparently, where they want to build it.
Okay.
They want to build these data centers up there because we're just chewing through energy to power AI. And so, they want to head them up there and let them power it down here.
Yeah, well, not to be conspiratorial, but I do actually think the next step for humanity is living in space. Like, we're depleting our resources here, and sci-fi's shown us the way, and the way is up. And is Elon Musk going to be the first one to get us there? Oh, Lord.
Uh-oh.
Let's wait and see.
Yes, indeed. We'll have to wait and see whether we all end up living on the moon. But for now, we're going to stay on Earth and get into today's deep dive, which is looking into the tools that a number of big tech companies actually have to combat child sexual abuse on their platforms, but they're not using. Now, that's part one. That's coming up next. Already in your feed, though, is part two. We chat to a dad whose son was very nearly sextorted. It's a really interesting chat. Make sure you have a listen to that after this next deep dive.
A heads up, this deep dive contains discussions of child sexual abuse. If that's not for you, feel free to skip this deep dive and we'll catch you in the Arvo web. Online child sexual abuse doesn't occur in dark corners of the internet anymore. It's happening on the same platforms many of us use every single day. And a new report from the eSafety Commission has found while some of the world's biggest tech companies have the tools and resources to stop things like the live-streamed abuse and sextortion of kids, they're failing to do so. The eSafety Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant says the gap represents a failure of industry will, while experts say it's time we move beyond reports and start strengthening legislation. Up next, I'll be talking to Joel Scanlan, an associate professor and expert in cybersecurity and child abuse material from the Child Sexual Abuse Material or CSAM Deterrence Centre at the University of Tasmania. And then in a special second part of this deep dive, Sash chats with a dad, Radio's Matt Acton, about learning his own son had almost become the victim of a sextortion scheme online. That ep is in your feed now, so be sure to have a listen to that after this. But first, here's my discussion with Joel Scanlan. Joel, welcome to the briefing. Before we get into what big tech is and isn't doing, you've said that child abuse is hiding in plain sight on mainstream platforms at the moment. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so every year we have quite a lot of reports of CSAM occurring on mainstream platforms. The AFP receives about 80,000, or it did in the last financial year, 80,000 reports, and those were all pretty much on mainstream platforms. And if we look at surveys of offenders and people trying to locate CSAM online, particularly through dark web surveys and those sorts of things, over 50% of them say their first exposure to child abuse material online was either by accident or just sort of in their feed on a mainstream platform or in a message on a mainstream platform. So we often think, it's just the dark web. So, well, no, actually, that entire onboarding, that early sort of exposure and getting into this sort of content is occurring on mainstream open web platforms.
So we're talking Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchats, things like that, right?
Yeah, and so, this is a good number, though it sounds bad, is that the number one platform for reports of CSAM is actually Facebook and the Meta properties. That's actually because they're reporting a lot. When we've got some other mainstream platforms that aren't really reporting, particularly around device manufacturers like Apple and Android, in that context, they're reporting really low numbers. But we know that those are the devices that are being used. And so, we see millions and millions of reports coming out of Meta, and that's them actually doing the work of finding it and then reporting it. But obviously, we wish they could do more, but there's other platforms that are reporting next to none, and we know that's not accurate.
Well, we'll get into some of the forward-facing solutions in a moment, but I do want to talk about this latest eSafety Commission report. A big focus of that report was live streaming and video calls. Can you talk us through how they're being used by predators?
Yeah, so they get used in lots of different ways by predators, and there's sort of a few different sort of harm pathways that are occurring there. The one that we hear about a lot is a lot of live streaming that gets paid for out of the Philippines and other neighbouring countries to us, where we're basically, as that sort of rich Western country in Australia, making use of disadvantaged people around us that then go, oh, right, we can sell live streams of abuse of our children and make a bunch of money. It's a dramatic increase there. So those sorts of things are the main ones we hear press coverage of. But there's also lots of sextortion, lots of grooming. And so we see a lot of that of Australian children being targeted online by groomers. And so a lot of that's happening in those live streamed calls. If platforms are looking at that and going, can we detect this? Can we detect this? It just keeps continuing to happen without any sort of intervention.
Is this where platforms like Discord come into the mix? Are kids just sitting there live streaming their game, and a predator has hopped into their chat section and is, having that conversation with them and making those suggestions to them?
100%, yeah. And so it's those sorts of things, whether it's on Discord and those sorts of chat platforms that are separate to the platform, or it can be within the platform. And so for years, we've heard lots of reports of harm occurring in Roblox, for example. We're talking 10-year-olds. We're talking really young kids. And so they might be playing around with someone and think, oh, this is another kid I'm playing with. But then they start getting these other requests, and then they often get moved off from Roblox or other platforms as well to platforms where they can stream or have other chats that are then encrypted, and that's where they then get extorted or have abuse material get made and get shared.
The biggest targets here are young Australian men. That's what the eSafety Commission has identified. And they've identified that they're being targeted by organised criminal networks. Now, you did mention overseas interactions here. How are authorities in Australia dealing with this, and how are they trying to shut it down?
The young Australian males being the target is because those organised crime groups go, oh, okay, if we can manage to trick a 14-year-old to sending us a dick pic, for example, then we can say, all right, you've got to send us money, send us $50, send us $100, which in our sort of context, a lot of our young people have that kind of money. But if you're then talking about, it's because a lot of these were recurring for a long time out of Nigeria, for example, 50 Australian dollars in Nigeria actually goes a lot further than it does here. And so that's why there's that incentive there for criminal organisations to do this. We do see a lot of young males get targeted, and that's sort of just the modus operandi of those operations. We have seen AFP and other law enforcement around the world running operations in those countries around the world to extradite offenders to face court.
All right, so that's how law enforcement's trying to deal with this. We've also got prevention, this whole other world that's, we're constantly reporting on and talking about. Interestingly, in this report, we got some concrete evidence yet again that the big tech platforms do have the tools and the means to crack down on this and to essentially stop it, yet they're not using those tools. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so when we're looking at prevention in this context, we're looking at detecting what's happening and then putting in warning messages and a whole bunch of other different things that can follow on from that. However, that detection is going to add some sort of friction to those systems because you're going to end up, possibly with some false positives and those sorts of things. And so the tech platforms are sort of incentivized to have as low friction as possible on their platforms. And so that low friction thing they want to constantly push towards is actually a context where there's less safety. A lot of the sort of safety options that would be put in place around detection and responding and saying, do you realise you're talking to a stranger, sort of nudges that could occur, are adding friction. And they see friction as a direct hit to their bottom line in terms of how they make profit. And so what we're really wanting them to do is actually focus a bit more on safety and not profit. They're heavily motivated by profit, and we're wanting them to focus a lot more on safety. Now, some of this is around safety by design and making sure that, children can't be contacted by an adult they don't know. And I think we made mention of Roblox already, but they've recently rolled that out saying, if you're under a certain age, you can't be contacted by an adult. This is literally in the last couple of months. Why wasn't that there for the last 5 years?
Yeah.
Like some of these are really common sense design choices that they've purposely made the opposite side of that choice to have as low friction, grow the user base, grab market share as much as possible on these platforms because that's what the profit is around.
How much of a deterrent or how much influence do you think our eSafety Commission has when it comes to this space? We're talking about huge platforms here. We do know Snapchat has reduced its response time. So we've seen positive developments there. They've gone from 90 minutes to 11 minutes to respond to incidences involving this. Do you think that's the result of our eSafety Commission trying to crack down in this space, or is it, to your point, just positive PR?
I mean, it would be a bit of both. What I would say in terms of e-safety and putting that in that global context, the e-safety commissioner and Ofcom out of the UK are probably the leaders globally in terms of safety expectations and doing things like these transparency reports. But we are seeing a lot more countries starting to do similar things and starting to push quite a bit. So even off the back of the social media delay that came in December and the entire world was watching Australia as we brought that in, we've now seen a handful of European countries now say, no, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do the same thing. We can actually be a leader, having a bit of impact there, and have a whole bunch of other countries that then follow along. And that is what gets big tech to then think, oh, right, we need to be more proactive in this safety. We end up being a thought leader in the space, even if our population is not massive.
Before we let you go, Joel, I do want to ask you, you've written that we need to move beyond reports and into legal action. I guess in your ideal world, what laws would you like our government to introduce to really tackle this problem? Yeah,
so the legal action I'm talking about there is actually just a legislated duty of care. And that is what the review of the Online Safety Act sort of came out with, and the current government has said it supports that. That is the sort of pathway that we're on. People like myself and others in our industry who really are focused on child protection would be saying it's not going fast enough, but that is the direction the current government is going. We want to support that. So come on, government, you've said you want to do it. Let's accelerate. Let's do this. Because then it really flips it around. Instead of it being reporting what went wrong, it then becomes what are we doing that's designed for safety? Let's think about safety first. And that's really what it's doing. Everything else in our lives, whether we talk about cars or catching an aeroplane, everything in those contexts is about safety first. Why can't online environments be the same, particularly when we're thinking about our young people and as they're sort of growing up and learning about the world and all those sorts of things and needing to use the internet for school and all that sort of stuff, how about we make sure that environment's actually safe?
Joel, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No problem.
That was Associate Professor and Expert in Cybersecurity and Child Abuse Material, Joel Scanlan, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, this is part one of a two-part deep dive. That second episode is in your feeds now.